All right, welcome everybody to Learn with Lowell. Today we are rejoined with Peter Nguyen, who was on 4 or 5 years ago. We talked about engineering living materials at the time. He was at the V's. He still is at the V's. We're going to talk about that. But we are most likely, just for like a teaser for what we're going to get into today, we're going to talk about synthetic biology, climate change, and everything in between. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Great having you invite me back, Lowell. It's great seeing you after all these years.
Yes. So I mentioned I was going to start here because I'm selfish, but so in the Midwest, yep. I thought I was going to avoid climate change related problems. I thought like, hey, the world's going to suck, but maybe in the Midwest we can like build stuff and then bring the good to everywhere else. But we've been getting forest fires from Canada and they won't stop. Is there anything from a synthetic biology standpoint or in your brain that we could either like reduce the effects of forest fires? I don't know how we do that. You have a bigger brain than me. Scrub the air or insert solution there. Well, how do you think about combating forest fires as it relates to climate change?
Yeah, no, I mean, I share your concern and your frustration. We've been getting a lot of that haze in Boston too. Literally where I walk out the front door and I'm like, what is going on? Did a house burn down in my neighborhood because the haze was so thick?
A quick note, Uncle Sam wants you to help make this show successful. Subscribe and become a member today.
And so we're getting a lot of it up in Boston here. And it's gotten to the point where we regularly check the air when we go out. You go to airnow.gov, and it gives you like weather forecasts. Yeah, so you thought you're going to be a climate refugee over in the Midwest, huh? That didn't happen.
It's following me. I'm very upset about this.
Yeah, that's a hard question. So for synthetic biology, there's not much you can do, right? Because forest fires you have climate change causing huge swaths of Canadian forests to kind of dry out, and then they spark up in the summers and they burn like crazy. And I think what a lot of people don't appreciate is the sheer scale of how big it is and why we can't get it under control. Just kind of realizing how big it is, just getting a little smoke down here for us is like, that's not that bad if you look at it from a global scale. Scrubbing the atmosphere is interesting. So that goes beyond synthetic biology. That's more entering into geoengineering at that point, right? Essentially, we are kind of, if you do want to scrub the atmosphere, and I've seen designs where people have designed things like that, and they're fully set on implementing this, where there are these huge towers that will take in the air and scrub the air, and maybe even pull out CO2 from the air while it's doing that. I don't remember who exactly designed it, but I know a lot of different companies and a lot of different governments are looking into that. And it's gotten to that point in climate change where these are technologies that in the past science fiction has kind of introduced and developed in sci-fi stories for geoengineering of other planets for for development for human beings. And now we have to kind of take those kind of same ideas and apply them for our own planet because we've screwed things up that bad. That's kind of sobering to think about.
There's a commenting on just the scrubbing of the atmosphere, like capturing CO2. There's a person who's recently on the show, which I don't think the episode's been up yet, but it will be up soon, that they've built like a pilot device in south in Saudi Arabia, which basically pulls in air and CO2 and then uses like a water mechanism to like spray water on like this thing, and it like apparently it like grabs the CO2 because it's heavier or lighter or something, like a differentiator, and then they can store it in a solid or a liquid. And there's like, that's neat, but it's also like, it's kind of like nuclear power plants where it's like, oh, it's really simple. Yeah. It kind of disappoints me. Like I want like this like Kevorkian like crazy way of doing things. It's just like, oh, you just put some water on and then you like keep it in a little capsule, then you take it out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean that's probably due to costs, right? They're trying to keep it as simple as possible. But yeah, scrubbing things out of the atmosphere, I don't think that's a starter for wildfires. Just because if you look at why if you look at the response of these wildfires, a lot of the people that are fighting these wildfires are they're not paid hardly anything at all, you know. And so there's not that much funding just to combat these wildfires. And so if you say, all right, we're gonna try to develop something and put money into dealing with the after effects of the wildfire, I just think economically that's non-starter. And the more I am in the whole climate area, kind of looking into the technologies and all that stuff, the more I kind of zero in on the economics of it, because I really feel like for a lot of what's out there are technologies available, but they're just not economically viable. They're too expensive. They can't be scalable, and they're just non-starters. They make great fluff stories where you can kind of get some buzz, but in terms of a practical implementation, you kind of have to look at the economics, right? Somebody has to fund it. Somebody has to keep it going. It has to be sustainable. And where's that money going to come from? So if I said, hey, Lowell, we're going to build a couple of towers in your backyard. It'll scrub the air. It'll be clean. Your whole area doesn't have to worry. But by the way, your taxes will increase about 40%, or let's say probably not even 40%. It'll be like 400%, to be honest. Nobody's gonna want that. And so it's a matter of what you're willing to live with. And right now, we're reaching that period on the planet, I think, where it's like, okay, how much are you willing to put up with, and how much will it cost for you to live in a place where you're insulated from all of the stuff that's happening? It's a lot of difficult decisions that have to be made.
Yeah, I think the gentleman who was on the show said that the plant after the pilot plant, which I think is going to be 10,000 tons of CO2 that can be stored, which is it's a small dent, but it's like getting up to those like million tons that I think people want. I think he said it was like 15 to 20 million, and I really hope that I was allowed to answer that. But so for like 10 tons a year, that's like 15 million of a plant to build. I don't know how. Yeah, but at the same time, I don't know how much you would need to take out to reduce the smoggy effect of forest fires. Like I don't know like how much of it is weighted compared to like CO2, and how if you could use a similar process to rip it out, that'd be kind of nice. I mean, if it was like a similar thing, I think you could get like Chicago, whatever. I think you could get like all the people with like really high net worth, property taxes. Like they build like a couple of them like just north, and then like they filter it before it gets in. But I would I guess that's a mathematical equation. Like how much would you have to scrub out at a given period of time to make it so you generally wouldn't notice it? Someone could do the math. I don't think we have the numbers to do the math right now, though.
Yeah, I feel like Canada would bristle at the U.S. or anybody trying to spend that much money while they're just fighting wildfires still, right? And so a lot of it is, can you put money on the problem?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the problem of climate change and increasing temperatures is a huge problem to tackle. But one thing that you can tackle, for example, is minimizing the likelihood of forest fires for expanding to the extent that they do. Can you create forest breaks beforehand, before fires break out, so that if a fire does break out, it can only go so far and it's limited because you've already engineered these fire breaks in. And that is another, we're talking about global scale, this is at this point subcontinental scale engineering, right? It's not exactly terraforming, but you're talking about the huge Canadian forest and trying to like engineer it so that forest fires are limited. Nobody's going to want to pay for that.
Do you like the idea of, I think it was Elon Musk who said like a carbon tax of some kind? Like if you add a tax to it and then you use that money to like fund research, you think that would be, because I hear your point. A lot of times it does just come down to like, what's the economic incentives to do A over B? If it's cheaper to do A, like I've had people on the show that are trying to upset supply chains that basically have like slave labor attached to them and build locally in America so that you don't have slave labor in America. But if you were to say like, hey, you have to pay more for this non-slave labor supply chain versus mine, most people are gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna go for the, like the evil utilitarian thing because most people don't care unless they know about it. Then it's like a product marketing thing. But but if you add the incentive of like maybe there's a tax difference or like the U.S. doesn't do business with them, what have you, or there's like a slave tax. I'm like really drawing the metaphor too far here, but if there's like a carbon tax, that might be like the incentive that switches people over to using technologies and practices that that slowly start making a change even faster. But how do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I think at this point there needs to be some kind of top-down implementation of things like that, such as, like you mentioned, a very strict carbon tax. But I think we have to be mindful the political will for something like that is almost non-existent, right? Because we're talking, I think to most people that are going to be listening to your podcasts, it's a good idea until you're the one that has to pay the tax. And eventually everybody does, because it trickles down. The companies that get charged with this tax, they're going to end up charging more for their products and services and things of that sort, right? So things will increase the price. But maybe it is needed right now because, things are problematic. And so I think having top-down regulations for a lot of these is a viable alternative. I just don't think it's likely to happen because more and more you will get people put into office that are put there to say, oh, this isn't that bad right now. We have other issues. My constituents are struggling. How can you ask them to pay these taxes? Of course. And of course, they're probably pocketing like petroleum money. But, and so I think, once you have, I guess this is kind of veering off into politics, which is, I feel like once you have an affluent country where people are used to a certain standard of living and they start to lose that standard of living due to maybe like just economics, maybe it's the evolution of the country itself. Maybe it's a particular evolution of the economy itself, the global economy, the local economy. And then you have these disruptions where you do need to kind of tighten your belt, where you need to kind of put these top-down rules and regulations in place to kind of figure out and iron out these kinks. And these are potentially existential problems that we're trying to deal with, right? But once people start to realize that my standard of living is going to decrease, then you start to see huge pushback against that. And I think that might backfire in that it's not only just a pushback on carbon tax, for example, which is very specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very specific thing. It's going to bleed out into, these people being environmentalists or people that want these changes, they want to take away your gas, they want to take away your gas ovens, they want to take away this and that, and then it develops into a culture war, which it doesn't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see these things as needed. I just don't see them as likely to happen. And this is my personal estimation, kind of thinking about human nature and my own personal view of like how humans, the dynamics of how we operate on the planet. Yeah.
So then I imagine the onus or like where the real change to climate change is more in your department of engineering or developing something from a science standpoint that is at a cost level where you could either sell it to like B2B to like scrub different areas or what have you. So it sounds like that's more the route that you think that people should go down, like out engineer the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like if you give people two options, right? And I'm going to use plastic waste because that's kind of something I'm focused on right now, is plastic waste. So, there's a huge problem with plastic waste. 10% of it doesn't get recycled at all, ends up in the ocean, ends up in landfills and everything. Imagine if you put a tax on plastic waste, saying, all right, we're going to go through your trash, and for every pound of plastic you throw away, we're going to tax you for it. So either you find a way to compost it, you find a way to, they're compostable plastics. You find a way to recycle it, or you find a way to reduce your use. You know, people are they're gonna go bonkers because plastic is in everything, right? We go through plastic like so much. You know, if you put top-down regulations like that, people will get angry. But if you develop a new technology that is economically viable, and you're like, look, we have this new technology, we can actually take plastics, break them down, and make something else with them that you can sell for a profit. And then there's that magic word with a P, profit. I can make you money. Then all of a sudden people are interested, you know. So I think if you develop a technology and it has an economic incentive in that people want this, people want clean air. They want, you know, pristine rivers. They want these things. It's just extremely costly to get there. But if we can kind of short circuit that using technology and get to a point where the economics are just within reach, and then if they're just within reach, at that point, you kind of like develop it, and once it's adopted, you kind of like scale things up, and things will get cheaper, hopefully, right? I think that's the more viable route, where you don't have such a huge public pushback on things, and you have everybody, okay, I can make money on it. It's good for the environment. Great. You know, everybody's on board at that point. And we just need the science to get there. I really think having scientific breakthroughs is the key thing for just not only improving our lifestyle, but making sure we're doing things in a sustainable way, right? And I feel like if you look at every major huge change in our lifestyle, you can imagine the advent of the steam engine, for example, right? That was through the engineering of steam engines and scientists looking at, enthalpy and heat and how these things work. And I think it can literally be the foundation for an economic boom. But everybody needs to kind of at least put some money and effort into developing these technologies right now. And there's a huge amount of effort, because I think a lot of scientists, they do realize that there is a huge need for it, and there's actually money for it now. And so, yeah, there's kind of like a little gold rush happening in terms of people developing new sustainable technologies. You just look at every article that comes out about the next EV battery, right? All these advances in battery technology that have happened just within the past 5 years. And you look at battery technology back in the 80s, 90s, it was pretty much stagnant, right? And that's because there was no demand to really like generate that kind of technology until you had EVs, and they had a very, very high specific technology requirement that, we just weren't able to meet. And so now people are like, okay, let's try to hit it. So yeah, science and economics, they make very good bedfellows. I think that's my final assessment.
Yeah. Are you is your focus on, so Molly Morse was once on the show, and Molly, if you want to come back on, you're welcome to. But she's out in the Bay Area. She runs Mango Materials. Are you familiar with her work?
No.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I won't want to, but I guess for people listening, they wouldn't know anyway. So it's good to cover ground. Basically, she uses methane to produce plastics that are single use and biodegradable.
Yeah.
Is that the lane you would want to go down with your work?
Yeah, I mean that is exactly the lane that we're going into. So and the whole idea is, for example, methane, huge greenhouse gas, right? It's much more of an amplifier of global warming than carbon dioxide is, and so that's something you definitely want to to kind of prevent getting in the atmosphere. And so it's essentially a waste. And can we use that waste to create other things, right? And the whole idea is it's this form of alchemy. Can you take something that's worthless, magic it into something that is worth a lot, right? Science can get us there. And so that is kind of the exact lane that I'm taking, as well as a huge number of other synthetic biologists that are taking, and taking these materials that are wastes and trying to convert them using biology into something that is highly valuable at that point. And so what I'm working on with the bees right now is I'm very interested in developing systems. These are biological organisms that are specifically engineered to take waste such as oil waste and plastics, take that and convert it into something that is highly valuable. So imagine if I had all the waste in your neighborhood, right? If I was able to take that, think plastic bottles, plastic bags, all the stuff that would end up in the oceans, all the stuff that would end up breaking up into plastic microplastics that end up everywhere in your body, giving you toxic syndromes and stuff like that. All of that plastic, I can take that, I can engineer a bacterium or a microbe or a bug to eat that plastic, right? And to take that plastic and convert it into something like, for example, fuel. What if I could take all that plastic and convert it into gasoline that you could put in your car? I mean, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can turn it into animal feed, because when you think about it, and I feel like a lot of people when they think about plastic, it's this cognitive disconnect, because when you think about plastic, one of the very first things you think is it's synthetic, it's plastic, right? You don't think about taking a plastic bottle, chopping it up into little pieces and eating it, because it's not natural, right? But if you think about it, it was derived from a natural thing. Hundreds of million years ago, that was a leaf somewhere that was eaten by an animal and was buried, and through all of the millennia of like heat and pressure, you turn that into crude oil, and eventually you get from that plastic. So it used to be a living thing at one point. The atoms in there used to be a living thing, right? And so all we're doing using these engineered microbes is we're breaking down those atoms back into what they were, which is just usually carbon atoms. And living organisms are great at taking carbon atoms, breaking them down, and then reassembling them into what it needs to survive, right? This is exactly, for example, that's exactly why you eat, right? You eat a steak, your whole body breaks it down into atoms, and then it stitches it back up into your own muscles, your own brain cells, your own self, essentially. And can we take that whole idea and make something that digests plastic, breaks it down, and then you can just say, all right, I feel like we need more fuel today, crank it to fuel, and now it spits out fuel. Or let's say, and this is a very exciting concept, we can actually have these bacteria now break down these plastics and then make bioplastics with them. And so now you're making a plastic that is actually biodegradable from plastic that is not biodegradable. And that way you're actually solving two problems at once. One is replacing plastic, and another is getting rid of the plastic that we already have that is waste, that is, just everywhere right now. And I think that is, it might sound sci-fi, but it's totally possible in the lab right now. It's just highly inefficient. And once you see something is possible, it's just inefficient, you have a route to just crank things. What knobs can I turn? What nuts can I crank? How to get there to the point where this is economically viable. And my whole dream, my whole vision is like, hundreds of years in the future, when I'm long gone, and when this podcast is, in the Library of Congress somewhere, right? the people hundreds of years from now are going to be like, oh yeah, of course we break down our own plastic and make more plastic with it. What else would you do with it? You know, and they would be shocked that in the past we just threw it away into the ocean or threw it away into landfills. It just seems like a no-brainer to do that. And I feel like, once the technology is there and then people adopt it, it becomes part of kind of our the way we do things as a civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it be, so I see the power of what you're saying. I see the impact of what you're saying. It sounds like it'd be tailored for each of the use cases you were talking about. It wouldn't be,
Right.
for instance, like one organism that's been engineered. I don't think, from my limited knowledge, it sounds like you would have to re-engineer the organism for each of the use cases, because I imagine it'd be even harder to try and get like all that functionality into one yeast or whatever the heck you'd be using. I imagine it's easier from an engineering standpoint to just to like hyper fixate on what the end functionality you want from the organism.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds really powerful to take this engineered organism, and then basically feed it plastic and have it like out convert. It sounds almost like that Star Trekian, matter converter or whatever it's called, where like you can like make tea hot or whatever. And like you're saying,
Yeah.
like we're all doing it, every day. But I could totally see, that tapping into like garbage plants or any of these other different things that are already like a part of our way of life. They just like slip in that technology in there and
Yeah.
feed the beast, and then have like this whole different supply chain from it that I imagine would be also decentralized. Like the supply chain to feed it wouldn't be that complicated versus like other ways of doing things.
Yeah. So the whole supply chain thing, we're not even close to being there yet, right? We just need the technology to be efficient at this point. And that Star Trek technology you're thinking about is the replicator, right?
There you go.
Earl Grey hot, right?
Yes.
But it won't be as fast as the replicator. And we already have replicators. You and I are replicators. Every living organism is a replicator. It just happens on a kind of different scale. And you're absolutely right. Having one organism that can do all these things, that is like that is certainly possible. It's just highly, highly difficult to achieve. And like I mentioned right now, breaking down plastics using bacteria is possible. It's just inefficient. And we're at this point right now where people can see that this is achievable, but because it's so inefficient, the way we go about as engineers kind of tackling it is to simplify it absolutely as much as possible. Because imagine you have a machine and you need to fix it. If it's too complicated, you have to think about all these different systems in the machine, and it gets really difficult to kind of hone in on how do I streamline it, how to optimize it. But if you can simplify parts of the machine, like I can say, all right, I want this particular sub-assembly, and that's all I'm going to focus on to optimize right now. It becomes tractable. And so right now, what we're working on, what I'm working on, a lot of other people in the world are working on, the way we're doing it is we're saying, all right, we're going to focus on one particular plastic where we want to get rid of. And for example, PET, polyethylene terephthalate, right? So PET is one of the most used plastics in the world. It's, if you drink like one of the plastic soda bottles, that is PET. That's what you think of when you think of PET. Or the plastic containers on your eggs, for example, that's PET. We're going to say, all right, this is PET. We know chemically exactly what it is. It's highly defined. We're not going to worry about any other plastics out there. We're just going to focus on this. They found enzymes in the environment that actually selectively break down PET. This is back in 2016. It was a couple of Japanese scientists. They went looking around a PET bottle recycling facility, and they sampled the soil around this recycling facility. And what they found in the soil was that they found these bacterium that could actually make enzymes that would break down the PET into carbon, like the carbon constituents. And so that's kind of, that's amazing, right? If you look, biology will take care of it for you. You just need to kind of help accelerate that process. So if you think about biology, it's very blind. It does what it needs to if the opportunity is there, right? Just enough to survive. And in our case, we want something very focused. We want to get rid of all the plastic trash, right? Bacteria, that's not their goal. They just want some carbon from it or something like that. And so we can take out those enzymes, engineer them to be even more powerful, put them into another microbe that is even better for scaling this up to an industrial process. Then you have something that is economically viable. And so we're focused on those enzymes. One plastic, PET. We're going to focus on one bacterium with, every bacterium has its characteristics that are positive, for example. A lot of bacterium grow at higher temperatures, 37 degrees. If you want to scale up, you want to not probably do that, because then you have to heat things up constantly. That takes a lot of energy, and that actually adds up to a lot of fundamental structural costs in your process, right? And so maybe you want to use an organism that grows great at a lower temperature, and then we can pick one that grows super fast, so it's really efficient. And then we need one that actually can make bioplastics for us. And so there are all these little cogs that you have to kind of assemble just right in a certain order for it to have input plastic waste, output this new bioplastic, and then you get out these bioplastics that you can just throw away and they'll degrade within a week in the environment. That would be fantastic. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. In the end, what I'm envisioning is within the next, I would say, 10 years, we would like to have a specific organism that is a proof of concept demonstration that you can efficiently take plastic, convert it into bioplastic or something else that's valuable, and have that presented to investors to the point where they'll be like, I can see how you make money out of that, Peter. Let's do it. That's the kind of response we want. And then at that point, let's say 100 years from now, there will be other people that have developed other strains, and you'll have a library at that point. You'll be like, what kind of plastic do we need to get rid of today? Then you'll pick that specific strain, develop for that plastic, and then use that. Or you can say, I have a huge amount of plastic waste. We know it has a lot of PET in it. We know it has a lot of polypropylene in it. It's a mix of things. We'll just take from our library a mix and match of all of our different strains, and they'll work together to break down all that different plastic. That would be fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we are on the cusp of this this very exciting area of development for synthetic biology, and kind of getting rid of all of our waste and applying the synthetic biology to other areas as well that we're kind of grappling with climate change.
Yeah. And then I know for anyone who is like, wow, this sounds really complicated, it is, but if you want a great science fiction novel that goes into the way they solve the problem of the novel is using this engineering organisms approach. It's called Project Hail Mary by the guy who wrote The Martian. Fantastic book. It's over there. I don't think anyone can see it, but I recommend it if you want just I don't know, it seemed pretty realistic. The guy actually is pretty much a big nerd on these things, but in the equation of, and I understand for anyone who wonder, there's a wall because they're developing it, we can't go too far on the IP, which is just being respectful because they have to develop it and commercialize and do all these great things so they can keep doing great things. Just for anyone listening. But on a high level, what's the part that is the non-scalable part right now? Is it the finding and refining the organism? Is it feeding the finding the process to feed the plastics into the organism? And if that's too granular, just let me know. We can divert. But what is the non-scalable part of that equation?
Right now, it's almost all of that is non-scalable. Okay. So you can imagine going back to the analogy of a car, right? You have a car, but all of its systems don't work that well, then the car just kind of eventually doesn't function as you would want it to function. You wouldn't want to take it on the highway, right? And in our case, it's all of those things that we're trying to tweak right now. So for example, the enzyme that breaks down the plastic that we feed it, right? These are naturally occurring enzymes. And getting it to the point where it can really efficiently break down the plastic quickly is a problem, right? So other people have tried to devise and engineer these enzymes, and we're also trying to engineer these enzymes to improve their function. So you want it to be highly efficient at breaking things down, right? And on the other end of the scale is we want it to be highly efficient at making the things that we want, which is the synthesizing all of that stuff, right? The bioplastics, the fuel, and all that. And this research has been going on for at least like 10, 15 years. A lot of people are looking into these biologically generated products. And so that level of engineering is increasing the optimization so that you're making a lot of these products. And oftentimes when you try to connect those two, the amount of plastic you're breaking down and funneling into your bioplastics is very limited. So you can think of like taking your input, breaking it all down into atoms, and then funneling it into your product and making those, right? Ideally, it would be a 1-to-1. The amount of plastic you put in would give you the amount of bioplastic you put out, right? But right now, due to the inefficiency of the process, that's just not the case. You get fraction amounts of your product. And it's just not viable to do that because you have to make so much of it that a lot of the process is so wasteful that the amount that you get is so low that it will end up being expensive. So just like anything, like a factory, right, that makes a product, if your factory only produces a very little amount of that product, it's going to be a very expensive product because it has to pay for the factory, has to pay for the workers, has to pay for everything, right? But if the process is highly efficient and you're cranking out huge amounts, enough that the market is saturated, now at that point the cost can go down, right? And then we're trying to connect that. And then going back to the inefficiency of the process where we're trying to connect these two, in the middle is the bacterium, right? And the bacterium, what this microbe cares about is surviving. All it wants is to replicate, right? And so we have to actually kind of engineer in to the microbe. No, I don't want you to take all these atoms and make more of yourself. That's not what I want. I want you to take these atoms and make more of this product. And so, that is another issue, is streamlining the flow of the atoms so that the bacterium puts those atoms to use the way we want it to, and not to use in other ways that we don't want it to. And of course, having all of that balanced and tuned is kind of the key. And so all of those things are needed for something that's really scalable, to be honest. And all of those things right now are inefficient. And not only that, but we're talking about laboratory scale things. This is, we're working in test tubes, we're working in tiny amounts of culture. When you get to the point where this has to be economically viable, you think about an industrial scale up, then you have all these other challenges to worry about, right? So how do I dunk all this plastic that might be contaminated into a vat of bacteria? What's going to happen? Do I have to clean it? If I have to clean it, how much is that going to cost? Do I have to heat up the plastic so that the bacteria are able to break it down quickly? So there are all these like other issues that come into play once we get the initial system up and running. And so yeah, it's a bit of a long slog in terms of like things to tweak, things to optimize.
Yeah. So a couple of questions on this. Have you thought about using some type of structure like a cow's stomach that uses rumination of moving it from different chambers with different microorganisms? So instead of having like one omni microorganism, you could have like a different chamber breaking down grass into something that can actually be used for sustaining the organism?
Yeah, that's definitely an option, and a lot of
Mm,
people do this for a lot of bioprocessing, where just kind of like you mentioned, it's compartmentalized like a
mhm,
cow's stomach, right? Just like the way our stomachs do it, right? There's a certain digestive function for certain parts of our intestines, right? Um, and in a lot of bioproduction, it's also the case where they do that, where there's a very specific uh, place where one transformation happens, and the product isn't quite what you want yet. It's kind of like somewhere in the middle. You take that and then you go to the next one, and then it gets transformed again into something that's a bit closer to your final end product. And you keep doing that until you get to the final end product at the very end. And you do that typically because trying to put it all into one big vat often is inefficient. You want very efficient steps for each one in order to get to your final product. So
mm,
that's definitely something we can do and engineer. This doesn't necessarily have to be an all-in-one magical microbe that takes in plastic and makes out this other bioplastic. We could have a microbe take in the plastic and just convert it into something that another microbe can use to then make its bioplastic. And both of those are specialized for two different things, right? This one specialized for breaking down plastic. This other one specialized for making bioplastic. And then you just have to kind of see where you can marry the two. Um, and yeah, I think that's a viable strategy. We're open to anything right now. Anything
mm.
that works, anything that is you know, would be economically advantageous. We're definitely open to that.
Do you have the metrics thought out of the thresholds you need to meet to make it economically viable? Like the time to break down, the time
Yeah,
to bring over. Like, have you like thought out that level so that when you meet those thresholds, you know the win conditions?
that is a fantastic question. And that's a question I think a lot of scientists either don't think about or they try to put off to the side. Um, and so that is an area called techno-economic analysis.
Mm,
So techno side is technology, and then the economics of that, right? And so we are focused on just getting the whole thing up and running. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to collaborate with people that are techno-economic analysis, where they can take that entire process and say, all right, Peter, you take PET, you want to break it down using your process, given the efficiency you have right now using your system and making your bioplastic, this is how much your bioplastic is going to cost based on that entire process. They can map
mm,
that out for you like an accountant, right? And then you can take that, you can see, okay, that price for that bioplastic, how does that, is that, can that compete with
mhm,
what people are using right now for plastics? And what's the kind of the economic forecast for people demanding bioplastic? And you can kind of start to make economic decisions at that point. Is this a good business decision? So techno-economic analysis is really what connects the science and the business together. And that is really, really a critical part. Because if you wait until the very end of your science to bring that in, then they'll probably be like, oh, well, this probably wasn't even a good idea. You wasted a lot of your time, right?
mhm.
So we're trying to bring that in early. We're trying to get people to analyze the process early to see if it's even feasible for us to do this. Um, because there's a lot of great technology out there that is sitting on the shelf because it's just too expensive to implement in the real world, to be honest. And until some other technology comes by that you can add on to that expensive technology and lower the cost, it's going to sit there and nobody's going to be able to use it. Um, and so, yeah, that's a great question. Uh, and we're trying to kind of collaborate with people. If there's a techno-economic analysis person that does that kind of analysis listening, please contact me. We'd love to
Mhm.
talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a connection right there.
Yeah, and for anyone who is not familiar with the V's, it's like I think of it like the modern day Bell Labs for biotechnology and synthetic biology. It's like if you're not familiar with Bell Labs, it's like the place for all the engineering, everything in the modern world came from Bell Labs. It's like
Yeah.
the transistor, all these different things. So I think of it like that. I don't know if the analogy breaks down with someone who's actually been on the inside for so long, but that's how I think of the V's. It's like this. So anyone listening in, it would be highly advised to reach out. Basically, it's a great place, and Peter knows his stuff. So, the what I was thinking, how do you get an organism that wants to just make more babies, right? With the material that you give it, how do you get it to not make babies? Like that seems like you'd have to like convince it that it's like something like photosynthesis, where it's like doing something that eventually can make babies, and then it's just like a
Right.
byproduct of the process. But chemistry is like magic to me, so I don't know how you do that. How,
Yeah.
if this is like, once again, if this we're going too in the weeds on this, that I have other questions, but how do you convince it not to do something that it like just wants to do so strongly?
Right. And I think that's a problem with any living thing in general, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's literally the problem with cancer. It's doing things we don't want it to do. How do you get it to behave and do what you want it to do? And I like to think of it almost like a, a river. So when a river meets the ocean, the area kind of splits off into a delta, right? And you have these areas like almost like tendrils that come out from the main river, and it forms a delta. And
Hmm.
each tendril kind of feeds into the ocean. And the systems in a biological organism are like a pathway. So you could think of a complex network. If you could think of like when the bacterium eats something and it breaks down into atoms, then it funnels all those atoms to these pathways, and all the pathways make things that it needs to survive, for example, right?
Hmm.
So one pathway might make proteins. Obviously, you need more proteins to survive. Another pathway might make the lipids for its membrane, right? And so you need membranes because you're a cell. And then another pathway might make DNA. You need DNA because you're a cell, right? And so these pathways are evolved to change and adapt according to what's going on in the situation right now. So, for example, if you encounter a toxin in the environment, the pathways will change so that you make more of a protein that will detoxify that compound so that you can survive, right?
Hmm.
And so what ends up happening is, if you imagine this network in the bacterium, once it senses a change, it'll actually be able to compute, I need to do this in order to survive. And then
Hmm.
certain pathways will be enriched, other ones will be downgraded, because
Hmm.
your total flow of atoms, imagine it's constant. You have to take something away to ramp something else up, right? And it's very much like ourselves, where when you eat, the blood flows to your stomach, right? It's not flowing to your head. Some people get food coma. I get food coma. And so your body's like, oh, there's food. All right, I need to send all the blood here for a bit of time until I can digest it. Then everything will get back to normal, guys, right?
Hmm.
And so it's this like punctuated, okay, we need to change the system until you get back to a normal state, right? And going back to the river example. And so what's happening is, when we want to engineer something, we want to engineer a specific pathway in that network that we've designed. We've actually put a new path in that network. And we don't want the bacterium to go to other pathways. We want it to just funnel into that one main pathway. And so the way we would do that is we would reinforce that pathway, that one pathway, so that a lot of the metabolites in the organism funnels into it. So we're kind of funneling things into it. And going to the river analogy, it's like taking a river, looking at the delta and saying, all right, I'm going to create a channel. I'm going to create a canal that connects the main part of the river to the ocean. And that canal is going to funnel 40% of the river. And when you do that, the other tributaries of the delta are kind of going to shrivel up, right? Because now most of the water is going through your canal. And so that is a canal is engineered and it's made for a purpose, which is to funnel things in a certain direction. And so we've done that. We're funneling things through one pathway. And when you do that, you might find that, the bacterium actually adapts to what you've just done. And it will actually try to steal things off of that pathway into other areas that it needs to survive. Like it'll actually siphon off parts of the things that you've done. And so it's a constant optimization cycle where you put in this pathway, the bacterium tries to adapt to it, and then you look at it, you're like, oh, I see what it's doing. It's trying to funnel things into this other pathway. You go to that pathway and you crank it down. So going back to, again, to the river analogy, if you do that, you put our channel in, but it's not working properly, and that's because this other tributary has like developed, and now it's siphoning off things. You have to go back and you have to put a dam in that tributary, right? And so now you're trying to dam things off to keep that flow of metabolites going where you want it to. So long story short, it's a game of whack-a-mole. That's what engineering these things is like. And if you engineer this to where it's working properly, and you use the same bug over and over and over and over, it will eventually evolve out of that. It will start to make mutations to kind of impede exactly what you've engineered, because now if it does that, maybe it can replicate faster or replicate more, and then those will survive and those will actually overpopulate, and those will end up decreasing the efficiency of your entire process. So these escape mutants is what we call them. These escape mutants are a problem, and typically the way to deal with them is to always start from your original culture where there are no mutations, and to start your process using these clean mutants at that point.
That's interesting. Is there all this like advancement of AI and machine learning technology coming out? Is there any opportunity to integrate with that technology to speed up? Because I think anyone listening is gonna be like, if we can get this stuff faster, that's great. So is there any way to integrate to give you, integrate into the technology, or do you plan to take anything integrated in so you can go faster or refine things faster? Or is there something coming up that you'd love to integrate in to your workflow?
That's a great question. So this is a whole other conversation, so I'm going to be very brief. So the whole AI stuff, we've all used ChatGPT right now. We all have seen, Will Smith eating spaghetti on YouTube through the lens of AI and everything, right? And so AI is kind of everywhere in the public consciousness. But I think what a lot of people don't know is that AI is really revolutionizing things in biology right now. We're making advancements through AI applied to biological data that in the past, I would say 5 years, have just been like mind-boggling, to be honest. And the V's is actually doing a lot of that work themselves, actually. Sorry, I'm going to stop myself because I don't know if I should talk about it, but I will send you a link when the paper is out. So our lab in particular, Jim Collins' lab, is a lab that I work in. We do a lot of work in AI-based library generation to identify novel compounds. And the V's in general is very interested in developing AI-based generative kind of technology for biology. And so there is a huge amount of promise there, and people are already developing ways to kind of help us do that. And going back to that whole optimization cycle that I talked about, it's very complex, where we're trying to optimize certain pathways. And people have developed algorithms where you can try to use AI to engineer these pathways that will give you the most optimal combinations of pathways to engineer in. And so that is possible. The tools are kind of emerging right now. And so it's just a challenge of the biggest challenge, to be honest, is taking an experimentalist like me and finding a person to collaborate with that is adept at this kind of generative AI technology for biology. Luckily, at the V's, we have somebody like that. His name is Charles Riley, and so we, we collaborate a lot, and there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in the AI space for synthetic biology. I really think it's another revolutionary area right now that's happening.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about making a joke that like there was like adding a cut here, like the Men in Black came in and told us to stop, but I don't know if people would enjoy that as much as I would. When there is new technology that comes in, this is like a meta question. How do you know what technology or ideas or knowledge is worth you going down the rabbit hole to becoming a master, or at least sufficiently well enough about it so that you could like incorporate it, like build on it, like you're like the lead tech guy on it, versus like I can like proficient enough where you can have the conversation, but really partner with someone else to handle it. Like how do you like, because there's just so much stuff going on and you can't know everything. So then you have to like know what to specialize in and when to specialize in it.
I think that's a personal decision.
Yeah.
A lot of people are more comfortable delegating to other people to get things done because they want to get things done efficiently. A lot of other people, and I fall into this camp. A lot of people like to learn things and like to kind of tinker a lot, and they're like, "Oh, I need 3D printing for this project. Great, that's a great time for me to learn 3D printing." Then, they dive into it and they learn 3D printing. And I'm again a part of that camp where, if there's something new for a project where it's something that I haven't learned before, I kind of jump at the chance where I'm like, oh, this is a fantastic opportunity for me to learn this and become adept at it. Obviously, you come up against your own limitations, especially for things that are far further outside of your wheelhouse. For example, AI, right? So I grew up with computers. I did a lot of programming when I was younger. But a lot of the AI stuff is just like very specialized.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to know enough. You still need to know enough to know what's going on. So you do need to kind of do a deep dive into the mechanics of that process until you're like, man, this is really hard stuff that is beyond my ken. Like, I'm struggling to understand this. But at least you will have the vocabulary to communicate with somebody that does at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You have a vague idea of what's going on. You kind of can talk to them and they're like, oh, this guy kind of understands the whole process. It's basically learning enough to know that you don't know enough. and you're not ever going to be like efficient enough to do it efficiently to the point where your project can thrive. And so you do get to this point where if you try to do it yourself, your project will suffer, and once you have to realize that going down these rabbit holes is fun until you don't see the light anymore. You're so far down there, you're lost, right? And I think the more I do things, the older I get, the more projects I'm on, the more I'm mindful of like going down those rabbit holes. So I'll go down, take a peek, and then say, this is a time sink. I can't do this. Or I'll bring in people that are experts, such as my resident bees expert in AI, and we'll talk about things. And the great thing is these experts that you want to tell them, I want to learn more about this. Do you have a primer or a review or something to get me started from just a complete layperson point of view? And most of these people will be more than happy to give you resources to introduce you into what the subject is. And then at that point, you build a relationship between yourself and the collaborator where you're learning what they're doing, they're learning what you need, and you're kind of trying to arrive at a point where you're both on the same wavelength. And I think when you get to that point, that's when your technology, that's when your project really becomes synergistic and great things happen at that point. So yeah, that's my personal view of how I deal with that. And it's different for everybody else, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good methodology though for anyone out there struggling with it and they haven't found something for themselves. I think that is something to think about, and maybe they can find ways to tease out and hypothesize a way to implement that in their own lives. Like the big thing is, as general thing of advice for anyone listening, is don't take things carbon copy and implement them in your life. They will explode. It's not designed that way. Everyone's life is different. But so then talking about the V's, I think it's something I always wonder about is learning more about an area as you stay in that area. So we've talked about the technological differences as you've transitioned more into climate technology, but I'm also wondering how has your how has the V's changed, your perspective on the V's as you've been there for another 5 years? I always wonder, like there are times where I'll walk or I'll do something in an area that I know like the back of my hand, and I'm like, oh, that's new. I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know that path existed.
Right.
So I'm wondering, what have you like discovered, learned, or refined in like this year that you weren't as knowledgeable about? Like insert better terminology there for the last like 5, 6, 7 years that you've been there.
Man, that's a hard question. I mean, I'll give an example. One thing I've learned, everybody at the V's, you're right about the whole Bell Labs thing. And I think the key thing that connects what Bell Lab was, and I think the Bell Lab has become a bit of a legend, right?
Yeah.
But the key idea between what the Bell Labs was able to do is they had a critical mass of the right people, right? It's just having the right people put together in a small space, thinking of great ideas, basically. And I think the V's has kind of replicated that kind of formula, where they have a lot of great people with, great backgrounds, and they're trying to put that critical mass together. So pushing all those people together, getting them to work together, right? And oftentimes there are people in the Institute that are working on things that are synergistic with what I'm working on that I just didn't know they were able to do. So one great discovery this year was finding, for example, going back to the generative AI issue, is finding that that was an area that they were pushing in creating generative AI at the V's. So the chief scientist, Charles Riley, was developing that, and it just so happened to fit in with a lot of our other projects. And so there's a project I'm working on where we're working together on that. That came out as soon as I knew we had that capability. And so in an institute like the V's, where it's so diverse, you kind of have to sample what people are working on, because you never know when it might be synergistic with what you're working on. And I'm working on bioplastics, for example, and I just realized that literally the people next to me from a different lab are working on plastic degradation as well, right? So that's kind of crazy. And in terms of how the V's has changed over the years, so I've been there almost a decade now, very long time. And the V's has actually done a very great job at not being stagnant, at being kind of dynamic. They know that things are always changing and they always have to change with them. And so things are always dynamic. They're always trying new things. And the whole mentality at the V's often is, hey, this is a new way of doing things. Let's try it out and see if it works. If nobody likes it, if people disagree, then we'll fix it, but let's not be afraid to try new things. And that obviously that idea for science is a no-brainer, that you should be open to innovation, new ideas in science. But, it's across the board, that mentality at the V's. That's how they have organized strategies and how different areas of the V's are organized as well. So it's very progressive. It's very forward thinking in terms of that. And I think that kind of attention to make sure that we don't stagnate as a culture, as an institute, is definitely needed. You know, and I realize that just like no living thing is ever static or ever the same, no organism that is a collection of people, such as a corporation or an institute or a university, is also ever the same. It's always a dynamic living thing. And so, you know, the V's has done its thing that it needs to stay at the forefront of innovation. Harvard's always changing as well. It's its own institute. And yeah, you just need to be mindful of it. And, you know, at some point, if you're in a company and the culture or the company changes to the point where you guys aren't really matching anymore, then that's when it's time to move on, right? But the visa is still fantastic, and it's the changes that happen are things that are fantastic that need to happen for it to stay kind of innovative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds like it'd be really cool if there was like once a quarter or something like that, where there was like a 1-pager synthesis that was like 5 minutes long, where like every department would send like a random, like, you know, like everyone would send like one person, and they'd go on that big stage. I was at the V's. You guys have great conferences, and I think you have multiple ones actually, but and then everyone just like blitz through, like, hey, I'm Peter, this is what I'm working on, here's my 1-pager. If you're working on any of these different areas or this sparks something in you, come talk to me. I'll be over there. And like just like blitz through every single one. If you do that, I would like to be invited, but it doesn't sound like, I think that'd be like a great opportunity. Just like everyone's familiar, but they're not in depth familiar. Like you can just like do it in like 5 minutes, like 5 per person. And I don't know how many people are at the visit at the V's. I think it's like nearing on 1,000 though. So like that would actually take some time. A lot. Yeah.
We do have
like half a day.
We do have an annual retreat. And that's kind of where usually you get the overview of what everybody's working on. Not just the people that are presenting, for example, but in poster sessions, you get to walk around and talk to people. You know, and the secret in science is often, or at least for me, this is what I've found. The poster sessions are always the most valuable, because that's when, for those of you listening that don't know what I'm talking about, it's when you have a bunch of scientists that get together and then they present posters on their work. And these posters are, you know, it's about 6 feet by 5 feet, maybe, big poster. And it's kind of like, if you guys remember, we did science fair projects as a kid, and then you would have to make posters or something like that. It's very similar to that, almost exactly like that. And the great thing is, you know, you get to walk around and just talk to people. People are much more relaxed, and there's no time limit when you're talking to somebody in a poster session. There's obviously a time limit for the session itself, but unlike a talk where you're, for example, if there's a presentation and somebody's presenting and you talk to them, you can, the conversation kind of is just like very pinpointed, you know, until, because they have to leave the stage and somebody else has to present, right? But a poster session, you're able to sit there, you talk with a person, you talk about the data, and you get to have a real conversation with somebody. And maybe even multiple people, because there's often multiple people around a poster. And that's when I've had the most fruitful conversations and the most enlightening kind of connections with people, is during those conversations. And so if you're ever invited to these conferences, the poster sessions where it's at. That's where the fun is. Yeah.
So I've been to these types of sessions. I've presented at these sessions when I was in college, the research that I was doing at the time. But I always wonder, how do you, sometimes I end up just standing there and reading their paper awkwardly as they politely wait for me to read and then ask them questions. Is there like, what's your workflow to like walk up to someone with a poster? Do you go to like ask them, or do you read like the abstract conclusion, like synthesize it as quickly as possible, then start asking the questions. Like, how do you go from like zero to having like a somewhat meaningful conversation? And at the same time, if it's just standing there and reading it and then having a conversation the best way, that's fine. I don't mind being awkward. I can do that.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's like a better way.
Yeah. So the easiest way, everybody that's presenting a poster is typically excited about the work that they do, right? And so often, very, it sounds very vague and boring. But the easiest question to ask somebody when you come up to poster is, could you tell me about your work? Just open it up for them to kind of present their poster. Because when you are a poster presenter, like when you're presenting your own poster, you obviously made that poster. I hope you did. And you've arranged that poster in a logical way that makes sense to you, right? So you're writing that story for people to see. And so you've already have it in your head of the story you want to tell. And then somebody comes up, they read your poster. You don't want to interrupt them because they're reading. So you're trying to be polite, but you have that story already in your head. And so all you need is that invitation from somebody to say, hey, tell me about your story. Tell me what's going on. And then once you kind of unlock that, most people just kind of gush out like, oh, let me tell you about this. It's great. And they'll walk you through the whole thing. And so you don't have to sit there and take all of it in just kind of unidirectionally, just reading it. You might take a couple of minutes to kind of get your bearings, see what's the poster about, right? Look at some of the data, and then be like, hey, this looks really interesting. Tell me about your work, and then from there, the conversation naturally evolves. It's kind of like, going to a bar and saying, hey, tell me about what you do, stuff like that. You need that icebreaker there. To me, the hardest part has just been oftentimes people aren't near their posters. It's just there's nobody there, nobody to ask questions, right? And so that to me has been the hardest part, is just finding people, tracking down people, I guess.
I love the simplicity of that, just like Warfully just described. Like, I'm definitely going to steal it and credit you when it works well. And if it doesn't work well, I will blame myself and try to refine it. But I think that, like, people always are buttoned up and they try to look really nice at these things. Wouldn't it be really cool if they made shirts that had a little mini printout of their poster on the front and back of their shirt? So if they wander off, you can be like, oh, that's your photo. You can like find them, and then you like color code them or something, so it even like pops out even more.
That'd be super fun. The print might be kind of small.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they try to fit in as much as they possibly can into their poster. That there's like a bunch of text there. Plus, if they had it on t-shirts, you might have to like chase somebody trying to like read and look at all their data. So, but that would be very fun, actually. Please invite me if you ever have something like that.
Yeah, or I'll lobby the V's to do something like that. And I think as long as you see like the big bold title thing, I don't think it's like that bumper sticker. If you can read this, you're too close. Like, I think like just like, hey, let me just stare at your back for the next 5 minutes. I think that maybe just like the headline would be and then you can connect them or something. But because I think people always want to look nice, and I think in this case, if your problem is that, maybe the V's can make it more casual or something. And then maybe someone could be like the business that does that for them, and that's kind of like a little cottage industry. So, is there anything else related to your work as it relates to climate tech that it sounds like you're going to be pretty full up on plastics, but is there anything else that you are intending to even in the mind space of just like, you seem like a very curious person, like in the few times that we've spoken together, and so I'm making the guess that you probably read stuff, ingest stuff, and then form these different ideas that it's like, oh, if I have time, I can go down these different roads. And so I'm curious, what are some of these other roads as relates to climate tech and synthetic biology that you don't have the time to go down, but that are kind of fun for you?
Yeah. We actually just recently published a paper on synthetic biology and climate change, trying to kind of merge the two. It looks at a lot of different things. And one thing that I mentioned before that we talked about at length is the whole plastic thing. But there are a lot of other things that we have looked at, areas where synthetic biology can be applied to things that are going on right now in climate change. And these things that are going on are not things that are abstract anymore. I think this year has really shown people that climate change is actually, you're living it right now, right? You look at the ocean temperatures in here, down in Florida, it's almost like jacuzzi level, which is like absolutely crazy. You look at how hot things are this year. You look at, and there are all these other issues that are happening. For example, over on the West Coast, you have algal bloom outbreak, and you have all these sea mammals that are washing up on shore, getting poisoned by them, right? And so climate change affects the entire ecosystem, right? And of course, the ecosystem is made of living organisms, and synthetic biology can be applied to anything that is kind of a living system. And so there's a lot of things that synthetic biology can be applied to do. A couple of things that we explored, for example, coral bleaching, huge problem. Corals, they're the key habitat for a huge percentage of animals in the ocean. And so you could think of it as like wiping out the rainforest, you know, that diversity, that loss of diversity will have impacts, definite impacts on the global food chain, everything that we can think about, right? And so for coral bleaching right now in Florida, due to the high water temperatures, that's going on right now as we speak. Swaths of corals are dying right now. And can we use synthetic biology to kind of try to save as many corals as we can, at least allow them a chance to adapt, because things are changing so quickly that they can't adapt and they're dying. And so can we at least put a band-aid on things where, for example, can you engineer the corals to be more resilient to hot temperatures? That is something that we've thought about, and a lot of other people have proposed in the past. Is there a way to do this? And synthetic biology can't tackle that, you know, because it is a living system, right? It's a very interesting living system to deal with because it's a symbiotic living system. You have your coral cells, which are animal cells, and they actually kind of host algae that gives them the energy. And at hot temperatures, this kind of association, this kind of relationship dies. And so the algae leave, and the animal cells, they basically starve to death. And so you can think of it as when you see a white coral, that is basically the skeleton. And so it's like seeing the skeleton of an animal in the desert, right? That's what you're seeing, is you're just seeing the skeleton. And so can we use synthetic biology to kind of strengthen this connection so that the algae and the animal cells, the coral cells, stay together even at hot temperatures, and that it's resilient to hot temperatures, so that it can eventually adapt? Because that is the biggest issue right now. As climate change is happening, I think it's going to be very hard to prevent the full effects from happening, given we're so late in doing anything about it. But can we at least make sure that the living systems on the planet, some of them survive? So right now it's a matter of triaging, right? In order to triage patients, you need the medical technology to do that, right? And so synthetic biology can give us that technology. It can give us the band-aids we need for the next century, to at least save something, right? And so the coral bleaching is one thing that is definitely a concern to me. Another area in our lab that are directly working on right now is looking at how to sense the different organisms in the environment. So, for example, can you detect how climate change is impacting different organisms in the ocean, on land, in the forests, for example, in an easy way? And so right now, the way the way that people do it is, how do you count fish? Well, you go, you catch the fish, and then you count them, right? But is there an easier way to do that?
You do.
Uh,
There's a mossy earth does some type of like water test, and you can see the DNA. I think.
right.
Is that
So
yeah?
this whole EDNA technology is really, I think, one of the key things that is going to be implemented at a large scale. Things are still kind of being done in the old way, but this EDNA technology, there was a couple of papers published last year and this year where they sucked air out of the atmosphere. They just kind of caught a bunch of air, they filtered it down, and they were able to extract eDNA or environmental DNA from that air. And so you can imagine you're completely blind to what animals are in the area, right? And you just have an air filter sucking in a ton of the air, go back to your lab, and then you can figure out everything that's within 10 square miles of where you were. That's awesome.
That's
You don't
wild.
have to, that's absolutely crazy, right? And so this study was done in the UK last year, and they did it near a zoo. And they were able to identify all the animals in the zoo, just from DNA in the atmosphere. So can we apply that on a larger scale? So now you have a surveillance network of what's going on in the environment for organisms. So you can say, okay, there's this whole food chain over here might collapse because this population is gone now. How do we get that amount of data so that we can actually kind of put in either regulations, or we can alter things so that our ecology doesn't collapse. Because one of the things I think that's going on right now is a lot of environments, a lot of ecosystems are collapsing. We just don't know about it. We don't know until they're gone, right? You guys probably heard, and your listeners probably heard, I think this was last year, about all of the king crab in the Arctic disappearing,
yeah,
right?
2 billion or something like that, just
Right.
gone.
So one year they're there, you get a harvest crop, you get a bumper crop. Next year you look back and there's nothing. It's kind of like a mystery. What happened to them? Where'd they go? And so we're blind to this until we look back and it's nothing there anymore. Then we're like, oh, it's just gone, right? By then it's too late to save anything if you look back and it's gone. And I don't think this is alarmist, because it has happened, right? This is an example of it happening right now. And so we need to just be able to see what's out there. And right now we're kind of blind as to what's out there. The way we catalog living things right now is just so low throughput. It's like just taking a quick glance and that's it, right? You want something where you actually have sight, where you can see what's going on. You can make guesses and predictions based on the dynamics of how things are changing over time. So I think that's a huge area right now, is really leveraging eDNA and making a network of, this is the ecosystem, this is a state of the ecosystem right now. Here are the danger areas where things might collapse.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. I definitely recommend you and everyone listening to check out Mossy Earth. They do like rewilding of different environments around the globe. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they talk about this all the time. And I just thought of an idea that you could use to fund this project. You get all the Bigfoot people together and you say, we'll go through this. We'll develop the technology, and then we'll go out and we'll like scan the whole, any place you want. You guys can fund it. I bet you'd get the funding. If there's like 20
Really?
TV shows about Bigfoot, I think you could find him if he existed, or at least confirm he doesn't exist.
That would actually, that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
eDNA Bigfoot survey.
Yeah.
Hunt, I guess.
Peter hunts Bigfoot, and it's just you in a lab. I could see it.
No, I mean, Bigfoot is, we laugh at Bigfoot or anything, but I'm a very open-minded person. Cryptozoology is to me, yeah, sure. If there's data for it, then I might believe it, right?
Yeah.
We just need to find the data for it. And so
Yeah.
eDNA is a fantastic way for you to look for something without actually having to go out there and you know, locking eyes with a Yeti or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's something we'll start on Kickstarter and see how it goes, right?
I think it'd go well. And if anyone takes us up on this opportunity, make sure you don't cut Peter out. He needs his technology. Then actually just a quick, just, you know, so we're not making fun of the Bigfoot people. The number one group of people that find people who are lost out in the woods are Bigfoot people. It's actually like a statistic, like they're out hunting Bigfoot so religiously that they find lost people all the time. They're almost like a Forest Service. So I was reading this test the other day. So if anyone's, you know, laughing at the Bigfoot people, at least they're saving lives. And then so I think that's oh yeah, we ran over the time. So I will just thank you so much for coming on the show today. Not giving me eyes or a side eye or, you know, anything to let me know that they're getting mad at me because we went over. But thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your passion and your love for your work and getting people excited about hunting Bigfoot with eDNA and making changes in my plastics in the environment.
Awesome. It was my pleasure, and I had a great conversation with you, man. And I hope your listeners, you know, please reach out if you guys have any ideas. You know, we're scientists. We're open to everybody and their thoughts. So I'd love to hear from everybody as well.